Hello and welcome back to the rear end reassembly. So drive shaft and setting of pinion and ring gear has all been done. So today, hopefully, I'm going to get the whole shebang back together and back in the car. That would be bloody awesome. A couple of things after I slept on it last night, I thought, hey, I didn't really make too much of a mention of. The first is, now that everything's back in there, the uni joint does turn with a little bit of resistance. You don't want it to be sloppy at this point in time. Any lack of clearance between the bush and the back of the U joint here is going to self-adjust over time. All right, the other thing is I put the grease cup in. A feature of this car is the previous owner, for some reason, drilled and tapped grease nipples in there so they could just go and grease that way. But I don't know what's so hard about taking the grease cup off, filling that with grease, screwing the grease cup back on if it's empty. So every time you use the car, literally just give it a slight turn, and then that pushes just a little bit of grease into that bushing. Yeah, so it's good to go. The other thing I didn't mention, these gears, the pinion and ring gear, they're actually replacements, so they're a Marks brand. Just looking around for the, where did I put the, oh, here it is, around here. So some of you may have noticed they look really quite newish. So they're a Mark brand, and there's 13 pinion teeth and 39 ring gear teeth, which means I've got a 3:1 ratio, which is, they've given it pretty epic highway gearing. They came with 3.6:1 and some also 4.0:1. So to put that in perspective, I've done a couple of calcs here. At 1,000 RPM with my tyre size, I'm getting 51.8 kilometers an hour. It explains why its preferred speed is about 54 kilometers an hour, and that's only 1,060 RPM. So theoretically, at 1,500 RPM, which is not at red line for these engines, it's close to, but not at, it'd be a hair-raising nearly 50 miles an hour, 77.7 kilometers an hour. So yeah, thought I'd just add that in before we get things put back together. All right, so I've laid out some of the parts, well, actually all the parts for one side of the axle assembly. So this is the inner bearing. The inner bearing race is currently in the axle housing. Ignore the spider gear setup for the time being. This is just what these parts go in here, effectively. Thrust plate, thrust washer, thrust plate. So that's the center. And then we get at the axle, where the wheel end is, this is going to be the battle. That seal with that tiny hole has to go onto that shaft. It sits probably about here. And there's, to give you an illustration, that bearing goes, this race goes in after that washer. A washer here to protect this from the bearing. Bearing goes in there, obviously. Washer on the outside of that before another felt washer, and then a cover for the outside. So the thought here is this stops grease from leaking out. This stops oil from leaking into the greased area. And finally, I wasn't sure whether my axle tapers were worn, but you can buy these little, I suppose, little shims for your axles. Make sure that the wheel goes on properly. We'll just try those out. So yeah, so the bench exercise now is to put together the full assembly, which has both axles, the whole center together, because that's what you then need to be maneuvering around those axle harbs, the shells. That's when I progress. Oh yes, spider gears. 1914s, well at least mine. So there's no shoulder here. So, and the spider gears have a brass bushing in the middle. So they go like that. The later model one, where cost cutting I think kicked in, no bushing, just the steel, and this one's pitted as you couldn't reuse that. But yeah, shoulder on these. Okay, keep doing this in silence, as it's self-explanatory. Okay. Obviously we're going to get gear oil in there, but yeah, you could probably, you deserve a bit more light. How does that look? Little fibre washer that goes in there in between the two. And axle. Here I'm probably going to need the bolts before we get too far ahead of ourselves here. Which I will make a line up here. All right, I'll just get a spanner to tighten those up. Riveting viewing. Watch as John puts a cotter pin in. All right, I'm not going to put you through another two. We'll get those done off camera. Okay, before I move much further forward, I've put things together, and we do get differential action. Just making sure there's no play between the two. So I think we're good. That fibre washer is there to take up any end float of these axles, and they're sorted. So I just thought I'd make that point. Yes, I've got all three collar pins in. Good to progress to the next stage. Okay, so this is the left half, and it's going to go just in here like this. It doesn't matter what orientation at this point. Okay, so in this left half we've got thrust plate, as I showed right at the start. Thrust washer. This is the one I machined down, if you remember rightly. And I'll get another thrust plate. Okay, so this thrust plate goes if you can see that, I don't know. Yep, so it goes on here like this. And there's one pin that holds it. So what I find is that you've also got to put the bearing on first. Let me just set that up there. Bearing goes on first because you can't push the axle through the bearing when it's in. It's kind of weird. Now the bearing gets a bit of splash from the diff oil, but we'll put a bit of preemptive oil on there. Right, so as we lower this in, what's going to happen is that thrust plate's going to come off. But again, oops, there goes the bearing. Down she goes, and seat it like that. making sure those thrust plates are all in place first, which is what we got there. Okay, so the next part involves a trial assembly without the gasket. What you're trying to do is make sure that those thrust washers have just applying a small force on the carrier as the clamshells go together, so that as they bed in, you're not going to have the carrier able to move side to side. That's the whole purpose of those thrust washers. So doing it without a gasket, there should be slight drag. So I'm just going to try and get a bit of muscle memory of how much drag there is there. And it's just rolling, on those thrust washers in there. So yeah, I've got the other axle half there. We'll do a bit of assembly and do a bit of a trial fit. Okay, so checking that the pin that holds the thrust plate on is in. Thrust washer. And the thrust plate is already in that axle half. Bearing. I'll oil things up for final assembly. Oh, geez. Watch out. There we go. Okay, so it seems to go all the way down. Yep. Okay, got a few bolts in. There is some serious drag. Okay, I need to take some off that thrust washer. I'll take I think I'll take 10 thou off. 5 thou. Let's go with 5 thou first. So I need to get better at my estimation. 5 thou, hey? You reckon take 5 thou off? Nah, take 145 off. And we've got a good amount of drag there. Good amount being, yep, not too many, not too much. But not too little. Cinderella? Goldilocks. Yeah, so now it's just, now that that's all adjusted, take this apart. I've only got 2 bolts holding it in. Drive shaft in, bit of RTV in there and in there. No gasket. I've got a gasket for this. And throw it together, and we should have a result at that point. Okay, so hey, why don't you just watch, eh? Yeah, I don't know how the old fellas would have done it. You know, it took, I think I mentioned 8. Took 8 attempts to get it right. Assemble, disassemble, assemble, disassemble. But tools like this make it quite a bit quicker, as you'd appreciate. Ooh. Okay. Good stuff. actual fact, this drive shaft should be able to move backwards a bit. Let me give that a love tap. And a wiggle. Okay, let's go on here. Gasket's moved a little. Here's an idea. Why don't I move where that's been ground out around to a point where it allows the halves to go together. Like that. Well, folks, seems to have done the trick. So, yeah, it's come down. Maybe a bit too much on this side, just pinch the gasket. Drop a few bolts in there. Alrighty, yeah, that was the ticket. I've got one bolt in there. And all of those bolts in. It's all going to come together, I think, at this point. All right, so we're all buttoned up. I've even put cotter pins in there. And yeah, not much to report. All went together fairly smoothly. Now is where the fun begins. So I've got a felt seal. Excuse me. So this is a felt seal with a tiny, tiny hole. You don't actually widen it up. Had it soaking in some oil with a view that maybe that would help. No advice online. I've checked the Model T forums. So obviously the issue is it's not going to fit in there particularly easily. So I might get it out of the jig I got here. I want it kind of angled at floor level. See what I can come up with. This is the bearing sleeve removal tool. It's obviously hollow like a pipe. Fits in there without interfering with the axle. That's going to go there. I'll screw it down until it starts hitting the taper. Then we'll try and bash it in. It's going to be interesting when it gets to here. I think I'll try and compress the edge with a screwdriver as I hit it. I don't know. Got no idea. It screws on all right. I think on the pointy bit. Okay, so that's it, sort of in there, but it's going to be mushroomed up like that. I need to get it flattened out because we're going to have a bearing in here, which compare the length, so it fits virtually completely within that, and you've only got like 4 or 5 mils worth of clearance in there. Let's say, for example, I put it in. That's sort of the issue. So I think the next step here is to, I might get an old bearing and see if I can hammer that down. Oh, hello Jake, what are you doing? You come to check me out, have you? Yeah, it's all good. We're all good. Good boy. Make that 2 old bearings. Okay. Make that 3 bearings, one of which is a diff bearing, a pinion bearing. Wow. Honestly, no idea how this is going to work. There's too much material in this small hole. It's nice and flat though. It certainly flattened it out. There's literally no way. I don't know. Let's try getting the sleeve in. No, I think that's pointless. That's the good bearing. It's got at least a centimetre left. And it wants a washer before the bearing as well. Can tell you what I want to do. What I want to do is cut that in half, half the material, and once it's in there, it sort of effectively doubles up anyway. I'm going to come back after a little bit. I just want to try and see if I can fish that out now. Probably impossible. Okay, what I'm trying to do now is get that felt seal past the collar. There's a collar in here that kind of is equivalent to having a blocked end that the bearing can go up against, like a thrust, area of thrust. It's not quite as closed off as that. It's actually probably about this to here. So if I can kind of work it around like putting a tire on, get it in past that collar, it'll be giving us the clearance we need. You're not going to be seeing this. You're not going to see me swearing. Okay, sit rep. I tell you most solemnly, this has been one of the worst. I bailed out and pulled it out after it sort of, wouldn't go further past here. It will not sit in front of the bearing. Sorry, behind the bearing, just there. That's not how it works. It goes in behind that collar. What I'm going to do is get the other seal, and as I mentioned, cut that in half, and it should actually then poke in past there. That's the idea anyway. We'll see how that goes. All right, no real need to cut. It's a peel job, which I find quite appealing. So I'm going to sit down and work my magic on that. 2 halves, just like I bought one. So that will go in, bearing on this side. See how that treats us. Okay, sit rep, 6S. I can get you in there. Okay, so the felt seal is now in behind that collar, and remains to be seen if it will flare back out again and not leak, but it's as good as I'm going to get it today. We'll see how it goes. Worst case scenario, doesn't seal, and I'll order some modern ones. But yeah, that looks good. That looks good to me. Okay, so to get the bearing sleeve in, I'm using a piston ring compressor. That's really the only way, other than Jubilee clips, which I don't have. Okay, bearing sleeve is in, flush with that. I'm going to go ahead and put the other felt seal in on the other side. Same job again. Okay, picking up the action the next day. So just going to put bearings in. I showed you the inner oil seal. These are outer grease seals. So, and I've got a modern cap for the end. I'll just show you how they go together. Slight trigger warning, these bearings are going to need to be tapped in. Okay, so bearing in, because the axle isn't necessarily concentric. Use an old bearing. Just a gentle tap, folks. So next is a washer. I'm not going to call it a thrust washer. It's just going to stop the seal from getting eaten. And then a seal. And what you're not going to be able to see too well, because there's a little hole in this collar where the bearing lines up to. The bearing's got a little nub on it. These modern seals come with a little cap to cover that, so the oil doesn't find a way through there. And that just sits in there. And that just sits in there. Let me see if I can show you. I can't see me seeing you, seeing it. There you go, goes in there. Here's the thought. O-ring, rubber seal. Given it's a grease seal, I think it supersedes the felt. I'm going to say that for sure. That's what I'm going to be doing. It's now on there. Little cap stayed in. Good. It's funny, eh? Some shops will sell you Model T parts, but they will do things like put an order together where you've got felt washers and modern seals. You're a bit like, well, if you knew what you were doing, you would discourage the budding purchaser. But anyhow, That's a minor gripe for today. I'm going to turn you off, listen to some music as I do the other side now. Getting close. Be moving out motorcycles and stuff to make some room soon. Okay, slightly different vantage point now. We're on the floor, and these are a few of the simple components that remain to be put together. So these are radius rods. They bolt to the housing at the back and to the front through here. This is a curious little setup here. So there's two halves of like a clamshell. There's a grease cup on there. Notice I haven't greased yet. This is called the fourth bearing. Now this is an aftermarket. It's actually a genuine late model roller bearing in here. These are typically in the era just a Babbitt bearing supporting the weight of the transmission and the flywheel off the back of the engine. So the crank only has 3 bearings. This is the 4th. I'm lucky the previous owner invested there. So these clamshell halves go together and push into the back of the transmission. According to the Ford workshop manual, the adjustment of this end, so these are the radius rods going down to the rear, involve bolting them there and there first. But running down, I'm actually missing a lock washer here. They recommend having a lock washer there. Didn't know they made spring washers back in those days, but there you have it. Maybe they did in 1926. So yeah, this is according to the Ford manual. Now, you run down, there's a castellated nut that you run down just far enough so that you can get a pin through on both sides, and that sets the right distance. And then you tighten these up, and that'll obviously push it that way into tension on the drive shaft and provide the stability that you need. Just a really quick segue. So these are the bolts that hold the radius rod to the rear of the axle. One of the features of working on this car has been almost every bolt that hasn't had cotter pin has got the cotter pin hole blocked. So the pin itself, you can see there was a pin in there, and it's probably still in there. So you have to drill them out. So that's one that's blocked as well. I think I didn't bring one over that's been cleared. But anyway, so that's takes time. Go and clear all those out, and that's the end of the segue. The time has come. So uni joint greased, ready to go. Of course, radius rod cotter pinned, and in the car itself, I've got the 4th bearing all lined up. It's on the shaft. Dropped a bit of silicone where the tail of the transmission goes into the 4th bearing. There's a potential for oil to run through that, but otherwise that's all for sealing. There are gaskets which I've rejuvenated with some aircraft gasket maker. This is my favorite stuff. Permatex Aviation Former gasket. So there were gaskets there and they were in good nick. Bit of this juice on there. They won't stick and they won't leak. So, all right, I'm going to manhandle this in the next episode. Thanks for watching.